Okay, I'm sure you like my wonderful night vision glasses here just to deal with screen glare. This is a week where I want us to look at the environment, and this kind of relates to section 1.6, where we're asked to look at the origin and operation of the universe, advances in science and medicine, and humans' ability to control their environment. And lots of questions about the environment are being raised at the moment, with lockdown minimizing transport around the world, both in planes and in cars. We've noticed huge changes to the environment, even in this short time, and emissions globally. Dolphins back in the Venice Canal, some extraordinary changes. So we're going to look at 1.6. And we're kind of moving towards getting on to 2.0, which would be a great advance, would be slightly ahead of ourselves if we went on to look at issues of life and death. Not only the afterlife and different views on that, but also medical ethics, which is what we're coming on to look at next. So I'm just going to switch screens now to have a look at your textbook. Hopefully you've got your copy of this one here, AQA, Christianity. And if you can turn in it to section 4.1, you don't need to follow this on the screen. You can do it in front of you. I'm just going to talk through this chapter. And I think in a more collaborative way this week, I'm going to put up under different threads some evaluative questions and just get us discussing these together, and then we'll set one or two homework questions. So we've looked at the origins of the universe. We live in a very vast universe. Our galaxy alone, 100,000 light years in diameter. It would take 2.5 million years to travel to the next galaxy, and that would be at the speed of light. The current observable universe, 93 billion light years in diameter, with 100 billion galaxies. All sorts of things arise out of this. How long has the universe been here? The best guesstimate we have at the moment is 13.7 billion years. Is there life on other planets? Well, there are certainly Goldilocks zones, planets that are likely to have water and be within the perfect zone of not too near to a star, not too far away from it. So habitable planets, we do think there are plenty of those, and there's a search for this SETI, the search for extraterrestrial life, that is looking into that. So Christians believe that the universe began and God created it out of nothing. In Genesis 1, we have this account of 6 days of creation, God resting on the seventh, him making the light, the sky, the sea, the land, the sun, the moon, the stars, the fish and the animals and the seas, then the animals on the land, and then finally humans being made in his own image, male and female, he made them. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, verses that were read on the Apollo moon landings on the moon. Now, there are different interpretations, as we've said, of this. Fundamentalists take a literalist view of this, that God made the world is relatively young, and they kind of go off with an alternative to mainstream science. We've talked about fundamentalist creationist museums in Texas with their literal view of creation and the flood. But mainstream academic thinkers and Christians who look at these things through a scientific lens and critically read the Bible as being creative at that point, but a pre-scientific text. It's not attempting to answer the questions that we think of naturally after the advent of geodating and fossil records and genetics. That the world we operate in, the kind of scientific world that's been gathering force really since the 17th century, that is not the world that the ancients operated and lived in. For them, the questions that were more pressing were ones of what is the purpose of life, where is the meaning to be found, what about the origin of suffering and evil in the world, what is the relationship between humans and nature or animals. Those were questions that were more pressing for them, more practical, less scientific questions. Today, we have the evidence of redshift and the expanding inflationary universe that comes from physics. We've talked about CERN in Switzerland, this laboratory that uses the Large Hadron Collider to try and recreate the conditions that were there at the very origins of the universe. And we reckon that the world is around about 4.5 billion years old, and that evolution's been underway for hundreds of thousands, hundreds of millions of years, and that we live in a very ancient universe, one in which suffering and death have been part of the process of biological evolution since the outset. So some questions that are asked here are, recount the Genesis creation stories. We've got these 6 days of creation as we've talked about. Describe the two main messages of this creation story. Well, one is that God is the creator and that what he makes is good, including the natural world. Another would be that humans are stewards of nature. Mankind, Adam and Eve are placed in the garden. Adam names the animals in Genesis 2, and in Genesis 1, Adam and Eve are there to till the garden. They're made in God's image and they're stewards of it. Explain different ways in which Christians interpret the creation story. We've said that there are fundamentalists who interpret it in a very literalistic way, and liberals who would read it as a pre-scientific text that has quite different questions burning in it. Explain the Big Bang Theory. Well, this is an inflationary universe theory. If you imagine a balloon that you kind of blow up and it expands, the point is that an inflationary universe begins at a point that's almost infinitesimally dense, compact, hot, and then it explodes out. We get the gravity pulls together hydrogen and helium in clouds, gaseous clouds that then ignite, and eventually we get stars, the nuclear furnaces that create the universal table of elements. So eventually, when they explode in supernovas, all of the elements in the universal table are created. So we kind of move from physics to chemistry to biology over billions of years, and that's the kind of scientific account. If you want a great introduction to this and you have time, read Bill Bryson's account of the universe and nearly everything. It's a fantastic introduction to physics, chemistry, and biology. We'll put some of the evaluative questions up for us to discuss as a class. So we're on now to looking at the world and this sense of wonder and awe that we feel within it. The philosopher Immanuel Kant said, two things fill the mind with ever greater awe and wonder the more one considers them: the starry heavens above and the moral law within. So the starry heavens above raises this question of quite what human beings' role is in this all. So in Romans, it says, for since the creation of God's world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. This is saying that all of creation declares the glory of God. It's his handiwork, and it points to him as its creator. Psalm 8 says, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them, human beings that you care for them? So this raises this question of stewardship. And there's a debate, because when it says in Genesis 1:28, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and every living creature that moves on the ground. Some people take that dominion as a kind of excuse for domination. They kind of say, we're carnivores and we have the right to go out and kill and eat, and this is because we're set in place as the ruler of nature. And therefore some people blame Christianity. Philosophers like Peter Singer see Christianity as the root of the problem of our modern ecological crisis. They say it's because Christians have treated nature as something that's expendable and a gift to them to use in any way they want, that we are in the mess that we're in. It kind of treats nature as if it's not sacred at all, and it treats human beings as if they're made in the image of God, and that's the problem. Well, against that, Christians would say, no, this word dominion means rule over in the place of God, as a kind of vice regent. If you imagine someone ruling on behalf of a king or a queen, Victoria had vice regents in her day, although obviously that raises the problem of colonialism. But the issue of reigning in place of God is that you steward, you take care of nature with the justice and the responsibility that God would have done so. So in Genesis 2, when Adam is asked to name the animals, when Adam and Eve are placed in the garden to till it, their work is to responsibly look after creation, not to exploit it. And you might say that the reason for the mass exploitation of the environment is the profit motive, greed, humans believing that the resources of nature are almost infinite. And one of the reasons for this is, as America was settled and people moved west, there was always more ground, always more land. So we talk about the frontier mentality, that you can always kind of push west and there'll be more land to cultivate, to grow into as populations expand. That frontier mentality has gone, because we live in a globalized, industrialized world where we squeeze out every last drop of oil and fossil fuels and burn them, and that's unsustainable. The exponential growth of profit based upon the belief that you can continue to exploit nature has its limits. It's not endlessly sustainable. So we've got 900 million barrels of oil being used a day, an almost incomprehensible amount, and it's finite. Future generations will probably have to depend a great deal more on nuclear power, and possibly, if we can expand it, on alternative energy sources like wind power, wave power, solar power. Sustainable use of energy is going to be the real technological innovation for the future. Maybe fission as well, kind of very efficient production of energy that we have not yet managed to develop. Deforestation is a huge issue. People talk about the size of whales being cut down from Brazil every year, and again there are profit motives to turn virgin rainforest into cattle farming, and to have countries that are low in their industrial development accelerated forward. So the building of coal-powered fuel stations in China, for instance, would be an example of that. The hunger human beings in this industrial, high technological age have for energy, car energy, for battery energy, all of that means that as developing countries kind of come on track with their industrial curve, the pressure for renewable energy sources is going up. And we talk a good game about reduce, reuse, recycle. And certainly in this period, people have lowered their carbon emissions considerably with with not traveling as much as they would otherwise have done, air travel and land travel. But there are whole loads of ways in which people have moved forward, and many are very optimistic that we can have intelligent homes, we can have recyclable products, that we can use white goods that are more efficient, domestic appliances that are more efficient. We can recycle waste more effectively, use products that are built out of recycled goods, so we waste less. Now, there have been a number of meetings that have brought religions together over this. There's the Parliament of World Religions that has come together, that met in Assisi in Italy, and they pledged together in 1995 to try and work to make big differences in terms of lobbying governments and agreeing themselves to live more within their environmental means, as it were. And there are lots of international agreements that the big players, China and America, have pulled out of most recently. But we talk about the Kyoto Protocol and lots of other environmental agreements that we have tried to move forward with commitments to reduce carbon emissions by about 2040, to move forward and accelerate electric cars. The UK is committed to shifting in terms of production in that way, and to try and balance more of its energy budget on that. So Germany, for instance, leads the way here in having shifted a few years ago after the Japanese Fukushima power plant disaster away from nuclear energy and into alternative renewable energies. It leads the way in that. So questions that are evaluative like this, we're going to put up and discuss together on the posts. It doesn't matter if the oil runs out, as scientists will invent something to take its place. Well, Al Gore has a tremendous TED talk on reasons to be optimistic about the environment, and there are indeed technological advances that will come into play, but I don't think they're going to take out of our responsibility the need to reduce, reuse and recycle more significantly than we're presently doing. From geography, you'll be familiar with all these types of pollution that are real problems. Waste isn't just in landfill, it's also in air pollution and in water pollution. We talked about the Deepwater Horizon oil spill that released 750 million litres of oil that BP paid to have cleaned up. But all the birds and the wildlife that was affected by that, that's a longer term problem. Land pollution, we dispose of an excessive amount in landfill, and that isn't currently sustainable. And so lots of councils have moved towards recycling, and the waste has come down, but that's a long-term concern that we have. Give 2 reasons why it's difficult to control pollution. Well, as it says here, it puts the health of all human beings at risk. As populations increase, pollution and waste increases with them. Containing air pollution and water pollution is very difficult, given the amount of it that's pumped out. 3 types of pollution that are listed there. Caring for the environment is the most important action a Christian can take. Do you agree? Well, many would say aid in the developing world is even more urgent than the environment, and that isn't disconnected, because often the developing world pays a disproportionate price for the developed world's pollution. So as we get rising ocean levels, countries like Bangladesh, which have about a third of their land mass on river deltas that can be flooded, could create mass climate refugees. And that's a problem for the whole world, and it's created by the environment. So freak weather conditions disproportionately affect the poorest populations in the world. Pope Francis has very much been at the forefront of environmental concerns, and in a letter, an encyclical on the care of our common home, he set out the need to tackle the challenges of pollution, climate change, and poverty. Those three things, as I say, go together. The earth, our home, is beginning to look more and more like an immense pile of filth. And he stresses the importance of tackling this, and how there's been a long-standing tradition going back to Francis of Assisi about concern for the environment. A more passionate concern for the protection of our world is something that he wishes to encourage. And it's there in Scripture, as he points out, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, Psalm 24:1. As the Assisi Declaration says, every human act of irresponsibility towards creatures is an abomination, a disgrace to God. We could also quote Jesus's parable of the talents. How do we use the talents that have been given to us, the resources that have been given to us? So Christians have to work together on this. There are lots of examples of ecumenical projects where Christians have seen the importance of working together rather than splitting apart. And ecumenism emphasizes Catholics and Protestants and many groups that might hair split with each other, coming together to work to overcome the problems of the environment, and campaigning over that. So that's a big concern. And then there's the issue of animals and animal rights and animal welfare. This is only just coming onto the horizon, and I'm going to put up a TED video that I want us to watch by David Clough, who's actually been into MGS. He's a professor at Chester University and a friend, and he has written a 2-volume work on animal theology, where he's looking at this question of how Christians regard animals. And he thinks that Christians should become vegetarian and vegan, and indeed that in the original creation story, they are vegetarian. The first instance of an animal being killed is after Adam and Eve take of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and then to cover their nakedness, their shame, God makes them garments out of animal skins. And that's an example of the fall. So he's arguing that Christians ought to be, he's got a website called Animal Kind, and he is urging Christians to go vegetarian, churches to become vegetarian or vegan, and he has been for years. So I hope you know the distinction. A person who's vegetarian doesn't eat meat or fish. A person who's vegan doesn't eat animal products, including eggs, or animals that cause things that cause harm to animals, such as leather. So there are so many verses that raise this issue. Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. In Genesis, do not muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain. The righteous shall take care of the needs of the animals. There are arguments that are made on both sides. So there's a famous passage in the book of Acts where Peter, who is a devout Jewish leader of the church, he doesn't believe in eating with the Gentile Christians because they don't observe the kosher food laws. And he sees this vision of all these animals that are forbidden under kosher food laws coming down out of heaven. And it says, arise, kill, and eat in his vision. And that's been taken as being a license for Christians to be meat eaters. And so passages like that are wielded against other passages that seem to emphasize the rights of animals. So on a Sabbath day, the Sabbath laws allow or insist that all animals rest as well as humans rest. So sometimes Christians have this habit of proof text poker, kind of trading off rival texts against one another in order to kind of prove their position. Another issue in this whole world is, what is the value of the life of an animal as compared to a human? If you can make breakthroughs in medicine, is it okay to do experiments on higher primates who have a rich emotional life, a lot of intelligence? Koko the gorilla had a vocabulary of about 2,000 words, could lie and could joke. So with an animal of that level of intelligence, is it ever permissible to experiment on them? We do higher primate tests at the moment on coronavirus experiments that we're working on. So is that permissible to fast track solutions that could save many, many lives? And should Christians be vegetarian? Many other religions are. We think of Buddhists and Hindus who are vegetarian, and some Sikhs as well. So how are we to regard this? In Romans 14, the one who eats everything meat must not eat meat with contempt of the one who does not, and the one who does eat everything must not judge the one who does. So I think this is a very clear issue in which Christians disagree with each other. We will have a discussion about this because there's a nice evaluative question there. And finally, the origins of life. So just one section more on this. I know that we've talked a long time here. So Genesis 1, we're familiar with this story of Genesis 1 and 2 of God creating Adam and Eve. And you've spent a whole lesson or 2 lessons looking at the design argument and evolution. And we've looked at the mechanisms of evolution. We've looked at the life of Charles Darwin and natural selection that he built up the evidence for as a naturalist on the ship HMS Beagle in his voyage to the Galapagos Islands, how he understood that the survival of the fittest was a process of selection, and that he didn't have evidence of mutation at those times, but he could see adaptation in species, and how the Galapagos finches and his pigeons could be bred over time. In the case of the pigeons, selectively bred, intensively reared. In the case of Galapagos finches, being isolated to various islands, or the giant tortoises adapting in their shells over many generations to have certain characteristics accentuated. So why was this a problem for fundamentalists? Well, the big problem was Genesis is saying that, and other passages in the Bible like Romans, that when God creates the world, it's perfect and it's good, and then Adam and Eve sin, and then death enters into the world. But in evolution, of course, death is part of the process by which organisms evolve into more complex ones. So death and suffering are built into the evolutionary process. So when reading Genesis, adaptations have to be made, or one has to try and integrate science with theology or with the Bible. And that causes conflict, because for fundamentalists, the Bible is to be taken more literally, and it is the ultimate authority that stands over against science, and that causes real problems for many who believe in intellectual integrity and following the science where it leads. And that's a debate that goes back to Galileo, of course, who thought, in contradiction of the Catholic Church at the time, that we lived in a heliocentric solar system, that the Earth wasn't at the center with the sun orbiting around it, but the sun was at the center with the Earth orbiting around it, and that caused him to be under house arrest under the Inquisition. So there have sometimes been tensions between science and religion. That's an awful lot of talking through that chapter. What I'm going to do is to post up some questions now on the post section, and I want us to discuss them next lesson. I know that some of you have struggled with the questions on the design argument and the cosmological argument. I don't mind if you've not finished it, I do think you should have had a good attempt at it. So if I think you've met me halfway and you've had a go at it, that's fine. I'll certainly accept that and we can work through it. But if I think that you've just kind of brushed it aside and said, you know, I can't really do it because it looks like a lot of hard work, I think we need to make a bit more of an effort, because you had 2 periods on both the design and the causal argument. For most of you, you've done brilliantly. There are outstanding marks from a number of you, both on the past paper questions and on the design and the causal argument. So some of you are working independently absolutely brilliantly. So look out for those posts as they go up, and hopefully you can follow this video as you work your way through the book and listen to that chapter as it's discussed there.